Are we starting the show? Hank? Yeah, I guess we are. Okay. Hey, before we dive into the interview, I want to remind you that the submission deadline for issue 3 of the audio magazine has been extended. Oh, and we do have a little bit of a pile now. Better get in on that action. Deadline is December 31st. The theme is heroes. Pick up that ball and run with it. Essays must be no more than 2,000 words. Bear in mind, it's an audio essay in the end, so pay attention to how the words roll out of your mouth, but submit as a written piece of work, and if it's selected, we'll worry about recording later. No need to send me an audio clip. It's been a question. Email your submission with heroes in the subject line to creativenonfictionpodcast@gmail.com. And I pay writers too because of the Patreon audience. More on that later, okay? Dig it.
I love a good breadcrumb, but I think does anybody else call them that except for me? I don't know.
Oh, this is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, a show where I speak to badass people about the art and craft of telling true stories. I'm Brendan O'Mara. How's it going? Well, man, where to begin? Where to start? Listen, every podcast is special in its own way, but some people bring a little extra sizzle to the party. It's a combination of charm, insights, quotability, and above all, that certain measure of playing ball. Basically, you can tell when people are having fun and maybe are getting a chance to jam in a way that they don't ordinarily get to jam. Enter Mirin Fader. Mirin is a staff writer for The Ringer. She's written extensively for Bleacher Report magazine as well. She had 2 pieces from BR Mag earn a notable selection for the debut of Year's Best Sports Writing, the collection formerly known as Best American Sports Writing. One of those pieces is the feature she wrote about Tyler Skaggs, a former Angels pitcher who passed away from a drug overdose. And we dig into the bones of how she reported and wrote that piece. It's What Tyler Skaggs Left Behind. You can find it at Bleacher Report. She's also the author of Giannis, The Improbable Rise of an MVP. The book was at the printers, essentially, when the Milwaukee Bucks won the NBA title. So that she got some serious kind of juice out of that. And the book was on the New York Times bestseller list for a bit. I mean, geez, great stuff. I remember when Rachel Alexandra won Horse of the Year. This would have been January 2010 after her improbable 2009 run. And I was thinking, oh my God, who isn't going to want to publish a book about horse racing now? Okay, so Giannis and Rachel, totally apples to apples. Am I right? Anyway, her Giannis book, great book. And we get into how she wrote it, the style in which she wrote it, the chapter headings. That's all one-word chapter headings, and that's a funny little aside that I get into. In the show, great stuff. We don't talk about ball at all. So if you're a basketball junkie, don't forget your gift bag on the way out. You're probably going to want to leave at this point. But if you're a writer, a journalist, and especially a sports writer, hang tight, because this is the podcast for you. If you head over to hold on. I'm going to sip my red can light lager from Hot Valley, one of my favorite breweries in town, in just a second, because apparently I can't get the words out of my freaking mouth. Please wait. Oh, yes, that's much better. If you head over to BrendanO'Mara.com, you'll find show notes and your ability to sign up for my Up to 11 monthly newsletter, book recommendations, book raffles, an exclusive Zoom happy hour where I put out the code, and once a month we just hang out on Zoom, have a few beers, and we do that kind of thing. And it's just a list of cool things that I think will add some value and entertainment to your life. Whether you be a writer of memoir, essay, sports, you name it. First of the month, no spam. As far as I can tell, you can't beat it. And you can always keep the conversation going on Twitter at CNFPod and Instagram at Creative Nonfiction Podcast. Also, Patreon is how we subsidize this enterprise by and large and keep the lights on here at CNF Pod HQ. It's free, as you know, but it sure as hell ain't cheap. It's how we pay writers for their work in the audio magazine. Members get to ask questions of guests, and I give you credit for that. There are transcripts and coaching, and the knowledge that you're helping this community. Also, support for the Creative Nonfiction Podcast is brought to you by West Virginia Wesleyan College's low residency MFA in creative writing. Now in its 10th year, amazing. This affordable program boasts a low student-to-faculty ratio and a strong sense of community. Recent CNF faculty include Random Billings Noble, Jeremy Jones, and CNF Pod alum Sarah Einstein. Episode 12. Can you believe that? We're almost at 300. Where does the time go? There's also fiction and poetry tracks. Recent faculty include Ashley Bryant Phillips and Jacinta Townsend, as well as Diane Gilliam and Savannah Sipple. I love saying that, Savannah Sipple. No matter your discipline, if you're looking to up your craft or learn a new one, consider West Virginia Wesleyan right in the heart of Appalachia. Visit mfa.wvwc.edu for more information and dates of enrollment. One more sponsor. This show is brought to you by the word eyesome. E-Y-E-S-O-M-E. It's an adjective, pleasant to look at. She was an eyesome creature. That is a sentence from the dictionary. True story. Thank you, Isom. Happy to have you aboard. Okay, Mirin Fader is here, and she's bringing the heat, man. So strap in, CNFers. Here we go. Huh. Now, just as a weird and kind of wonky jumping off point, like of all things to start talking about is today alone I'm trying not to touch social media at all, and it's really hard. It's just the thing that always nags at the back of my brain. I hate social media by and large, and I try to avoid it, but I'm always pulled into its vortex. And I wonder what your relationship is to social media and how you navigate it as someone in the media and as someone who just wants to get good work done.
Yeah, I'm very different with social media than I would say a lot of my peers. I still don't have an Instagram, so I just have my Twitter. But I think the internet is going to be a part of our lives forever. There's no opting out, but there is a healthy way to choose how to be on it. And I choose to not be a scroller or somebody that's on there for, opinions or takes. I really just share some piece of writing advice that I found or some really interesting feature like once a day. And that's it. Like, I don't spend my time on social media like that. I feel like I just don't feel good when I'm on there, you know? So it's not worth it to me.
Absolutely. And it's great when you can contribute to the ecosystem in a positive way. Like, you'll retweet a story, something that's inspiring, good writing advice, and then, of course, you'll pop in a story of your own that you're working on.
Right.
I feel like you have a really, from what I've seen and from your offerings, it seems like it's a net positive for anyone following, but it also doesn't detract from what you're trying to do as a reporter and a writer.
Oh, yeah, no way. And I think what it is good for is networking. And I met my mentor on Twitter, and then we met in real life. And, a lot of times I just reach out to sources on Twitter. So I think for me, I've just decided, my platform is going to be positive, and the focus is the work. Like I always say, your portfolio should be your writing, not your personality or your Twitter voice. It's like the body of work is what matters. That's what got you here. It's what's going to keep you here, hopefully, if you're lucky enough. And so that's my focus. Yeah,
and the body of work as resume to me is so much. It's so important because some people think the resume or where you go to school matters, and I guess to an extent it might. But I'm sure you've had this experience. Just over the years, it's the features you write that you pitch to editors and show editors. It's not like, oh, where did you go to college? It's like, no, show me that you can do the work.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. I feel so passionately about this. Like, our best writers do not come from the top journalism schools. Sure, they have produced wonderful writers, but I went to Occidental College. It's a D3 school. We don't have a journalism major. I learned by doing. You learn how to be concise with your words when you're out reporting every day. You learn how to be calm under pressure when you have deadlines every week. And no matter where you go to school, nothing can substitute the best teacher alive, which is doing the work. So yeah, I love talking to students that don't come from traditional journalism schools. I just, there's so many other ways to tell a good story that doesn't come from shelling out hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And what would you identify as early growing pains for you as a reporter and a writer?
Yeah, well, I think just not moving up. I mean, coming from Occidental College, a school people didn't know about, and also being a woman sports writer, it wasn't like there were many of us, so I started at the Orange County Register, and there's the bottom of the totem pole, and then there was me. I was doing everything that nobody wanted to do. Little League baseball. I did a story on 4-year-old baseball. I did a story on fundraisers, junior colleges, high schools, so I think the challenge was I just felt like I wasn't moving up, and it was really hard. That was 2013 to 2017, it was a really brutal time to be at a newspaper, and I just wanted so badly to be moving up and writing long form features for a magazine. It wasn't happening. And I think the other hard thing was, getting laid off from that job and becoming a full-time freelancer. So I was half Bleacher Report, half ESPN, but I just could not land a staff job. And so, that was a really hard period of time for me.
How did you get your foot in the door at BR and ESPN to generate the momentum of that flywheel?
Yeah, it was super interesting. I had pitched a story when I was at the OC Register. They said I was allowed to freelance if it doesn't involve Orange County. So I had pitched a story to Grantland, RIP, and they turned it down.
Allow me just to cut in real quick. Mirin saying Grantland RIP. Can I just say how many people, when they recall Grantland, they just say RIP? Mary Pallon, now Mirin. I swear there was somebody else in there. It might have been Claire McNear. It might have been somebody else in the run of the podcast. It kills me and cracks me up that everyone just still laments the loss of Grantland. Even though The Ringer is kind of like Grantland 2.0, there was something about Grantland that elicits the RIP thing. So anyway, we'll go right back to Mirin. I just needed to cut in and say that.
But they said, here's an editor at ESPN's email, try them, which was so nice. And so I did that, and that ESPN person turned it down too. But then I had this magical email address, so I just kept pitching and pitching, and all of a sudden one article turned into 3, and then it turned into like a 3-year relationship freelancing for them. But again, I wasn't landing that staff job. And then BR Mag, they started BR Mag when I was in my 3rd year at the OC Register, and the editors found me. I don't know how, and they were like, we think you have potential, and they came to LA and they interviewed me, and they sent me on a trial run to Philadelphia to profile Monet Davis, the Little League phenom, who was starting to play basketball. And I did the story, and it was so fun, but I still didn't get hired. So again, I had this relationship, and I just kept freelancing for them, but it wasn't happening in the way I wanted to. And then when I lost my job at the OC Register, Bleacher Report predominantly gave me a lot of work, and they said, do you want to go to Lithuania? You can profile LaMelo Ball.
Wow.
that just changed my life. I was a freelancer, and I just left for a month, and I came back, and I finally got the job. So that's how that happened.
And when you had that ESPN editor's address, and you had that thing, and you were like pitching, what part of you was comfortable always knocking on that door, however frequently that was, even in the very likely event that things would say no? Like, how did you get over the resistance of constantly pitching and not feeling like you were maybe annoying the person and turning them off?
I'm sure I was annoying them, but I call it professionally stalking. It's diplomatic, and you got to be a little pushy, but No, I just think, I was so determined and I wanted this so badly. And it was really discouraging. It was not easy. It was painful. I felt like I wasn't ever going to break through, but it wasn't going to happen unless I kept at it. And so I think it's just that stubborn persistence. Like, okay, if you turn down 3 of my pitches, I got 3 more coming tomorrow. And I think that's what got me through, was like just focusing on the work and, letting myself feel discouraged, but not to the point where it stopped me from trying.
Yeah, perseverance is so key in this line of work, and you're, given that you're a sports writer, and I always lean on sports analogies on the show anyway. It's batting average is something that we see in baseball. We know that 70% failure rate is actually incredibly successful. You're a Hall of Famer. In pitching and freelancing journalism, we don't see the batting average. So when we get bombarded with rejections, we just don't know relative to the rest of the field, like what's good and what's bad. So we often get beaten down by constant rejection without knowing that, oh yeah, maybe 10 or 20% of the time landing a pitch is actually like a really good Hall of Fame batting average.
Oh, totally. People really don't realize it. And not even just the ones that you get turned down, but the ones that you report, midway through, and then it breaks down for whatever reason, and all that work and that story's lost. Like we could write a book, you and I, on the lost stories or the rejected pitches, or, that the whole thing is about failure. Like that's what I think people don't realize. This whole thing is about failure. People are going to reject your ideas, or they accept it, but the idea doesn't work out, or you're sitting there, you're writing, it's not working. I mean, this is a very constant thing that you're dealing with all the time, which is why it's really hard. And a lot of people are like, I'm just going to go into TV.
And so regarding the Tyler Skaggs piece, he was a left-handed pitcher for the Angels who passed away from opioid overdose and alcohol, and it was accidental death, but no one really knows at this point. When you're thinking about writing this story, maybe take us to the pitch as kind of a chicken egg question, like pitching the sources versus pitching your editors on the piece. So maybe you can take whatever pitch came first. Maybe you can take us to that one and how you started to get the ball rolling on that story.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I did was talk to my editor about it. I said, because it had been a couple months, like I was not going to pitch this immediately after this person's death, and there were a lot of sensational, pieces out there. And the pitch that I had to my editor was, I just feel like I don't know who this person was. And it's very sad to me that the only things I see about him is his life condensed into a headline. Tyler Skaggs dies at age whatever of an overdose. And, I just think it just strips somebody of their humanity. And I wanted to know more who he was. So I think with the pitch, you want to, like, what is some question that you're trying to find out? And my question wasn't, how did he die? It was, who was he when he was alive? And I think that is how I framed the pitch. And so, of course they were interested in it, but a pitch is only as good as what you can make it, right? So I had to go reach out to the family, and it was like 8-9 months of reaching out both to the family members and, the school that the mom worked at and the lawyer that was handling, because what made this really difficult is there was an investigation happening, and the lawyer was like, I don't think anybody's going to talk until that's resolved. But it's squeaky wheel. It's kind of like what we were talking about being annoying, but in this case, more like way more respectful annoying. I'm just checking in every couple of months, nothing crazy. Yeah. So that's how that happened. And then finally, after nearly a year of reaching out, the mom and the fiance finally said yes.
What was the tenor and the nature of those pitches to lobbying? Was it Deborah and I'm blanking on the fiance's name. Oh, his wife's name.
So am I.
It begins with a C. I'll pop in with an aside and just say her name, but it's okay. Went back, did a little research. The name of Tyler's fiance is Carly. Carly Skaggs. Okay, back to Mirin. Yeah, it's like what was the tenor of those and the patience that you had to want to tell the story and pursue it for 8 or 9 months?
Yeah, just, deeply thoughtful, imagining that I was on the other end of the email and receiving this from some random reporter. How would I want to be greeted? And basically being really honest, not beating around, and just saying, like, this is why I want to do this. I really care about who he was, and I want to share that. And I am not here to write a sensationalized story. I'm not here to, I'm not here to make your life worse or cause more pain. And it also was like, I've done a lot of sensitive stories before. Here are some examples. I think empathy is my strongest trait as a reporter, and I would bring a lot of empathy to this piece. So that was kind of how I reached out to them.
And as you greet them and start speaking with them and interviewing them, what was the reporting process for you, and maybe even tools at your disposal, whether you're a voice recorder person or just a classic notebook and pen person? Like, how are you going about curating that information? Not curating, but gathering the information from them.
Yeah, it was really nerve-wracking because, number one, the subject matter, but number two, it was my first in-person interview since the pandemic. So that was
wow.
last August 2020. Yeah, so we were all masked up and everybody was nervous about that. And, because I went to their home. And so I think it was just, a lot of just the overall nervousness. So I had my recorder and I also had my pen and pad, just, I don't know. It was just, I'm there to listen, but it's also, I have to ask some really tough questions too. And so it was kind of a really tough balance, and his fiance started crying even before the interview started. So it was just, I knew this was going to be probably one of the hardest interviews of my life.
Not that you ever really get comfortable asking, kind of probing questions, but, when you're dealing with this kind of interviewing, you have to be very delicate with how you frame questions because you still want to build character and build scenes, but it's about, dealing with their grief at the same time. So, how have you navigated that?
I think it's about understanding that you don't have a right to somebody's trauma, and that, feature writing, nonfiction writing is about getting this really strange intimacy with a stranger that you would probably never get with any other human that quickly. And you can't be so quick to ask these really delicate questions. You have to get to know people and get trust, and that comes from asking questions from a place of empathy, and we didn't really even talk about drugs or the overdose until like a couple hours in. It really was like, who was he? And I think they felt more comfortable because they could tell I was there. I was really there for the right reasons. I really, truly did want to know what I was asking. It wasn't like I was there to write a salacious article. So I think that the empathy is a big thing, and being a good listener. It's not always about you asking questions. It's about you listening, and what do they look like? How are they talking? There's a scene in the piece about a teddy bear. And, the teddy bear thing only came about because I saw the fiance like holding it. And I thought that was a little, she's a grown adult and there's a teddy bear and you got to ask, what's that? And then that leads to really deep things like, yeah, Tyler's voicemails are on here, So I think that is also an example of there's no substitute for in-person reporting.
Yeah. And getting to your point about being a really good listener, I think maybe when we see TV or radio personalities, it never feels like they're listening because the reporter or the whoever, it tends to try to be as big a presence as the person they're extracting information from, which is, as you know, sort of the exact opposite of what you want to do if you're reporting on these kind of stories. So when you're in these conversations, how much of you is pretty much, asking a question as quickly as you can and then just really sitting back and just, nodding and just letting them talk?
I mean, I think it depends on how open the subject is, but a lot of it is me. When I interject, I ask for detail, like, because I'm trying to paint the scene, and you've got to get those details in there. And when somebody says they're sad, that's just, what does that mean? How sad? How does that manifest? So I think the questions I interject with are more so to draw out anecdote, because people don't naturally speak in anecdotes. But as far as like how that manifests in writing, I don't like being in the story. It's not about me. I'm old school. Like, the journalist is not the main character. And I think a lot of people, I've only done it twice because my editor made me for the international stories. It just made sense for the 2 LaMelo Ball stories. But for the most part, like, you're never going to see me. And I think these days, a lot of journalists want it to be about them. And, we're in the elevator and we're doing this. And, I'm not important. Tyler Skaggs is the important one.
And when you're doing your reporting, you're sitting there for, oftentimes for several hours. For people who think that you just get all the information in one sit down, like maybe you can talk about how often you might have to go back to these people to follow up to be like, oh, maybe there's a little nugget here that I probably should have followed up on. Can we expand on that? And how often maybe you circle back to these key figures in your stories?
I do it a lot, especially because sometimes, especially if it's a sensitive story like this, somebody might be so triggered by recalling a memory that it's like inappropriate to be like, what color was the bed sheet? So I think you have to judge if it's appropriate or not in the moment. So I do tons of follow-up stuff and fact checking, and I just want to like triple check, is this really what you said? Do you mean it like this? Or I think it's sometimes also people don't remember correctly. They might say something and you just want to triple check, and they're like, actually it was this, and so I think that is a huge part of the process. I really think writing, as weird as this sounds, is the least part of it. The most is reporting and following up and fact checking.
And how have you gotten comfortable with, and there's often a lot of discomfort involved no matter how skilled you are at it, but of asking difficult and sensitive questions and going to that well? Some people might be really kind of gun shy to go there, but obviously you got to go there at some point to build the right scene and get the right mood. So, how have you, grown in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always going to be a level of trepidation and uncomfortability with that. And I think that's good. Like, if you're not, that's weird. This is really hard.
Yeah.
But I think I've gotten better at it. If you report and write every day for the next 10 years, like, you're just bound to become more confident at it. But I'm always nervous. Like, I think the day I stop being nervous about it, I should probably do something else. And I knew, especially in this story, I had to say, like, did you know? Like, did you know he was taking drugs? Like, and I think it's just so hard every single time you ask a pointed question like that. And the seminal quote in that piece about nobody put a gun to his head, like, yeah, that came from me being like, how do you reconcile the fact that he clearly took this, but you don't know much about it, and how do you reconcile those things? That you can know somebody so well and not know this one part of them. And that is a really awful thing to propose, and say. But I think you're not there to be somebody's friend. And I think that's where journalism is in a weird place. I think sports media, a lot of people want to be friends with the people they cover, and social media stars. And at the end of the day, like, you're a journalist, you got to ask your questions. So I think it just progressed from just years of having practice doing that.
That part, that's one thing I especially pulled out about him not having a gun to his head, because that's how you end the piece, and it just hits you very unexpectedly that you can feel the anger and the judgment and the blame that Deborah, the mother, is just like, in that moment, she's just like angry with her son for doing that. And it's at what point in the reporting did that come out, and when did you know that that was going to be your hammer?
That came out like midway through the interviewing process, but I actually didn't know that that was the hammer for a while. That I had a different ending originally, and my editor was like, I think originally it was like second to last section, and then he was like, "What do you think about making it the last section?" And I was nervous about it, but it made sense because like this is never going to be okay. Like this is never going to be okay. And I think ending it that way is real life. There's a tendency to tie a bow on things in sports writing, and so and so was such a wonderful person. Even like, yeah, I'm sure you've read articles where they're like, so and so's a great athlete, but an even better person. And just stuff like that, just really corny stuff like that. And I think this is a situation where it's like it does a disservice to the story to pretend like it's okay. Like I don't want to be a person that just writes happy stories. Like life is really tough, and this is a tough part of society. I mean, today we're interviewing. I feel like I just saw a headline in the New York Times about like 30% more overdoses from fentanyl this year or something like that. So some article about the rise in overdoses today. So anyway, this is a long-winded way of saying like the hammer is there because that is representation of real life.
Mm. And once you've filled up your notebook, you've got your recordings, and maybe you've even gone through the transcribing process, or maybe you go through Otter like I do to transcribe and then go and clean it up. But once you get all that information, what is your next step when you're starting to curate and try to organize this information?
I make a list. I say, what are my best images? And by images, I mean anecdotes, details, stories. And I just kind of go through my material and I write those down. And then I say, and it's good too, because if you don't have a lot, you're like, oh, I need to do more reporting. Like clearly there's not enough scenes in here. And, a feature lives or dies on the scenes it has. And then I write down, what is this story really about? So it's, Tyler Skaggs is not just a story about a person that died. It's about who was he when he lived. And it's a story about regret. It's a story about loss. It's a story about confusion. It's about being unable to reconcile your current situation. So once I know what it's really about, I can kind of take that list of scenes and images and try to put them into a loose structure that makes sense to me. And so then I move them into this structure, and then I start writing, and, oftentimes the structure I pick doesn't work, and I end up moving a million things around like Twister. And so it's just, it takes, I'm a slow writer. It just takes a very, very, very long time for me to write. I oftentimes actually start in the middle. I never start writing from the top. I hate the lead. The lead is the scariest thing ever. If somebody doesn't like it, they're going to stop. So I leave that to the end. Too much pressure. So yeah, I start from the middle and then I go down, or I start from the middle and I
go up. That's great. When I spoke to Susan Orlean a few weeks ago, she's very big on getting the lead right, and then it cascades from there. So it's really great to hear your input that you kind of save it for the end. And I almost like saving it for the end because you can almost plant some clues in the lead of all the stuff that you've written already. But I get the other way too, of like, let's try to really crank on the lead and then everything should pour out from there. But it's so great to see that dichotomy.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point about like the clues. I love a good breadcrumb, but I think does anybody else call them that except for me? I don't know, but
oh, absolutely. Gold coins or breadcrumbs, absolutely.
Yeah, no, and I like it too because like you have to know what the story's really about in order to do the lead. And sometimes you don't know fully until you write the story, and I think it's the lead is like orienting us into what it's really about, right? So it's like it's hard to know that on first swing. I mean, that But I mean, Susan is Susan. Like, she's amazing, and I can see how it happens, like that for her. But oh my God, I won't even touch the lead. Oh God, I hate just thinking about the lead. Just stresses me out.
Now you said that you're a slow writer. So, what is it about the writing of a long feature of this nature that has the gears turning a little bit slow? Like, what's the nature of that slow writing, I guess?
Because my structures are never linear or simple. I go in and out of time at random places, like for emotional effect. We might dip down to fourth grade and then come back up. There's a really boring mode of writing out there that I think is like the third section is like dip down, how he got into the sport, dip back up to, whatever. And I just like unconventional structures, and I like playing with time, and that gets very complicated. Should this anecdote go here or should it go there? Does it have more emotional impact there? Does it hit you more here? What is the effect of it there? For me, every single sentence has a purpose, and I want to have these moments that hit you, and it's hard to, the one in the Tyler Skaggs one, I forgot what it was, but I think the fiance was like walking home or something, and she like thinks he's there, and it's like by her ankle. I don't know. There was something about ankles, and that took me like hours to just sit there and get that image right, because half the time I overwrite and I want to make it sound pretty, and it sounds bad, and so you have to just keep editing it down and fixing it, and so it takes forever.
I'm 100% guilty of overwriting and trying to sound either too funny or too clever sometimes, or just getting overly descriptive. And I totally hear you. And a note I made was I kind of really appreciate you have very simple sentences. You write in a lot of short sentences, and that strikes me as, since you recognize the overwriting as something that you struggle with, the simple sentences must be a way that you're course correcting and getting back to what it really matters in these pieces, which is let the story speak for itself.
Yeah, I think that's definitely it. And I also think it's just the way I naturally hear it in my head, like just short and choppy and I like to be rhythmic too. I think the short, choppy sentences do like a nice rhythm to it. But also I was just like breaking convention. Like when I realized you could have one word sentences, I was like, oh my God, like all the stuff they teach you is wrong. I'm allowed to do that, and I think it took some time to start doing that, but I do like getting to the point. But yeah, I try to tell people this all the time. Like a lot of writing that you do just isn't good. Like you have to stop yourself from your weaknesses, so you just have to be aware of your shortcomings, and I'm super aware of mine.
Oh, that's so great to hear. And I think what a lot of people have a problem with too is not being comfortable enough to sit with enough bad writing for it to have the chance to become good. We have,
yeah,
right? Because we have like an image in our head of like, oh, this is what the perfect ideal sounds like, and then you start drafting, you're like, oh my God, this is garbage. And you just want to stop. And then maybe the only thing that keeps us going is like deadlines, because it's like, well, I got to turn in something. But
exactly,
yeah, so it's one of those things where you just have to get comfortable with the bad writing that stems from your weaknesses, but you just got to know through the rewriting process that your strength is going to be to tone down that overwriting and write more simple sentences, which doesn't mean juvenile, but it's simple, it's lean, and it allows a story to come through.
Right. Yeah, I think the best sentences carry the most weight when they're the most simple. And I can think of like my favorite books, they all do that. Like Toni Morrison, Beloved, I think the first line is 124 was spiteful. It's like, what? Like why was it spiteful? What's 124? And it just carries, so you're just like, oh, I want to go to the next sentence. Or like, God, I'm trying to think. Just every book I love begins like that. Like very simple. Very interesting. I used to think you had to like be really dramatic in the lead,
Yeah.
like cannonball. Like the way I think of it is like cannonballing into a pool, and that's like not good. Like it's more like dip your foot in slowly and invite the reader to come in with you is more the goal. But in sports writing, I used to be like really dramatic. Like the score was tied, blah blah blah, had the ball, he was gonna do this, and I'm like, oh, I hate it. So I thankfully, I got to grow up and get a bit better than that. But yeah, it doesn't have to be so dramatic. Just simple is the way to go.
And so, as you're putting a bow on a story, and it's getting ready for that publication time, what happens, post publication when you're rolling it out, how do you handle that part after you've finished, and then it's time to share this with the world?
I mean, I feel physically exhausted. Like when I turn in a store, I'm like, oh my God, like I need a day, and because it pulls everything out of me. I get really nervous the night before, like what if you doubt yourself. I'm never like, wow, that story was so good. I can't wait for people to see. Like when people, when people tweet, like, can't wait for you guys to see what I've got cooking. I'm like, ew, that is so bad.
Yeah, what's
I've
wrong
never
with you?
I'm like, I just don't understand. I never in my life have been like that. I'm more like, wow, I'm surprised people like this or surprised people read this. I think for me, it's like, I don't really care what people think about. I mean, of course, I want people to respect me as a writer, but I don't like, I'm just not seeking that. I'm more like, did I get this story correct? And by correct, I don't mean did I spell all the names correctly? Did I understand this person's soul and what keeps them up at night and what the hell they're dealing with right now? Like that is a very tall task, and that is my only concern.
Well, that's great. That's so great to get your insights into that whole process, because it is such a process, and it's only I don't know, it's jacked up, turned up to 11 or 100 when you're dealing with a book. So like you of course wrote this wonderful biography on Giannis that stemmed from a BR Mag piece, I believe. So how did you know that there was book in there, and then getting to the point where you're like lobbying for that kind of access to write an entire 300-400 page book?
Yeah, I had been wanting to do a book for a pretty long time up to that point and just couldn't find, the magical combination of right idea, human idea, sellable idea, agent that likes me slash and the idea. It was like a lot of things had to be in the right. And, I had been talking to an agent for a couple months before this and just couldn't quite find it, but he was so nice, and he was like, if you have any more ideas, let me know. And then when this story came out, I sent it to him. I was like, could this be it? Like, what do you think? We both agreed that it had so much legs because not only obviously was it sellable and it's a superstar like Giannis, but really nobody really knows much about him. And so that is so fruitful to have a subject where you could be the first, like you could write about things that people don't know about. And his story's so lovely and so universal, and it just so aligned with my purpose as a writer to write stories that I hope dignify a person's struggle and experience. And so yeah, we both thought that this was a really good idea to sink our teeth into.
And how much access and how much time did you have with Giannis in particular? Of course, you probably spoke to dozens and dozens of people, but with him as a central figure, how much time did you have with him over the course of the reporting for the book?
Yeah, well, when I did the story that we just talked about, I spent the day with him and his family. So I had a lot from there that I didn't use for the story because it just didn't, it was supposed to be about his brother. And of course, it ended up being about both of them. But so I had a lot left over from that interview. Right when I got the book deal, or actually before, I flew to Milwaukee to interview his brothers again, but then COVID hit, and his agents wouldn't make him available after that. And I only had 1 year, so March 2020 to March 2021. So,
Wow.
yeah. So of course I would have loved more time, but you kind of can't predict something like that. And I had to cancel my trip to Greece as well. So, but luckily, I had the interview with his mom and his brothers and, a lot of people close to him, and it ended up being 221 interviews total.
That's amazing.
That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of tape. That's a lot. That's the work right there. And it's got to be what a challenge to take whittle that stuff down into mining it for the ore that becomes a book. I mean, it must have been an incredible challenge to outline and structure a book around so much material.
It was so hard. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I think part of the challenge was like so much happens in childhood, but like you can't start the NBA years on page 300. So it was like, I know I'm going chronologically, but like you can't have everything. So I wrote 5 different versions of this book, and I don't know. I think there's no right version. It's just you run out of time and it's due. And the one that we went with is the one that we went with.
Right. I love the scene that is very, pretty much right in the beginning of the book of them moving this refrigerator to another apartment. And you just get a sense of they're quite literally like moving, or he's got like the weight of, the family is carrying the weight of each other, down the road. It's like so symbolic, but you don't you just lay it out there. You don't hit us over the head with the meaning of that. It just feels as heavy as you lay it out.
I mean, my weaknesses. I got to keep myself in check. I can't be like, the weight of the world is on this young man's shoulders and he's carrying it even as like I know what I suck at. And I really, you got 3, you've got 400 pages, girl. Like you don't need to tell us on page 1. It's so funny though, because my aversion to leads, but I knew that was going to be my lead when I got that anecdote that day. So I was at the Lakers practice facility, or the G League practice facility, after interviewing Kostas, and he told me that, and I was like, yeah, that's the lead. It hit me in a way that I've never been hit before by an anecdote. I knew it was, because I think it also, there was so much joy. They were like giggling as they wield this thing, and I think that's the story, right? It's like, it's not just this epic struggle. There was so much joy in it as well, and craftiness and togetherness.
Now the family is, Nigerian and Greek, and you have at the start of the book the Nigerian and Greek proverbs. The Nigerian one is, however far the stream flows, it never forgets its source. And then the Greek is like 1 minute of patience, 10 years of peace. When did those, strike you and hit your ear and you're like, oh, wow, this is going to be the perfect way to really symbolize the struggle of this family?
I think that was way late in the game, actually, like probably a couple months before it was due. I always knew from the beginning, I knew I wanted to have 2 different proverbs, one Nigerian, one Greek, because I knew that was a central tension, not even a tension in the book, but just like a central thing that he's grappling with. Just identity is huge, and there's these 2 ginormous parts to him, and people really only focus on the Greek part of him. So I knew from the jump I wanted readers to know, no, this is a book about both of them. Like this is not just the Greek freak. There's going to be as much about Nigeria. And so it took me a while to find the right one. I knew the messages I wanted to convey. There's a whole lot more Nigerian proverbs than there are Greek proverbs. Let me tell you that. So I had to find the right one. But, as a lover of literature, I live for the epigraph. I just love what people choose, and just things that like you would never think of when somebody pulls out a poem from the 1600s as their epic. I'm such a nerd. So I was like, this has to be perfect.
I love it. And there's a part in the book too where, when Giannis is being scouted, and a lot of GMs are trying to say like, oh yeah, we all saw the potential there, but the fact is like it's still a diamond in the rough thing. And but you wrote that it took several weeks of coaxing to get Danny Ferry who was with Atlanta. I don't know if he's still with Atlanta, but he's at Atlanta at the time to talk about Giannis, about the draft for this book. So, what was that process like to get him to speak openly? Because he was on the Giannis bandwagon and wanted to draft him, as much as the Bucks did.
Yeah, I was really stressing because I was like, you have a list of people you need. And there's people that you're like, absolutely need, red marker, need. And Danny was on that list. And we played phone tag for like forever. And then finally I got to interview him off the record, and I was filled with so much joy and so much dread because I was like, well, this could be it. Like, I can't do anything with this. And then convincing him to go on the record. That's what I'm saying. Like, a lot of this is persistence. There are people so much more talented than me, like writers that are just so good. But like, the one thing I can control is my effort, and I will not give up. And I will call. I have no shame about asking and trying and please. And I just want to hear you out. And you know what? Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but it did work in this case. And it genuinely was hard for him to talk. It really still upsets him. And you could understand why. I mean, the Hawks would be champions by now.
Ooh. Yeah, getting to that, the making those calls and that persistence. Like, I have tremendous anxiety when it comes to making cold calls, even for people that I know. Like, to just give you an example, like several years ago, I wrote a book, and one of my central figures was Calvin Burrell, this Kentucky Derby winning jockey. And I want to write another feature about him because he's in his 50s and he's still riding horses, but like on shitty tracks. Like, here's a guy who's won the Derby 3 times, rode the Horse of the Year in Rachel Alexandra in 2009, and he's on like a real backwoods tracks. Like, he's a total fall from grace, and he has that almost that old boxer storyline where I just feel like he's gonna probably just die on the racetrack someday. Like, he'll fall and like that'll be it. And I know this guy, and yet I still have like this anxiety to call him and be like, hey, I'd like to touch base. There might be something here to, a feature for the next, for what you've been up to the last 10 years. And so maybe like with you, how do you handle, getting on the phone and dealing with that, if it is something in fact you deal with?
Yeah, I mean, all the time. I'm thinking Pamela, what's her name?
Koloff. Yep.
Yeah, Pamela Koloff tweeted like last week, I've done this for 20 years and I still shake or something when I have to call. And I retweeted it because I was like, Pamela, yes. Oh my gosh, normalize it.
100%. Yep.
I feel that way all the time. But I think it's just, you have to, I know this sounds like really ridiculous, but I'm like, what can they do? Like, especially through the phone, like, you can't come kill me. Like, what's going to happen? The worst thing that's going to happen is they're going to be like, you suck. I don't want to talk to you. And, that's happened. So I just try to remind myself, like, honestly, the stakes are high, but they're low. Do you know what I mean? So I think I just steel myself, and sometimes also people have all kinds of reasons why they don't want to talk to you. And it might not have anything to do with the project, the book. It could be just flat out self-consciousness. Like, I don't want to, like, I'm nervous. So I just have enormous compassion for whatever reason they don't want to talk to me. And I think that allows me to see us less as like me versus you need, I need you. It's more just like, I'm going to give it a go. No doesn't always mean no. It just means not right now, and we'll see later. That's my mentality.
Sliding in here for a classic aside. When I was taking notes on this episode, before I spoke to Mirin, I wanted to make note and ask her about the chapter headings of her Giannis biography. The entire book is one word chapter heads. And I forgot to ask her during the conversation. And as I'm editing this podcast, I was just tweeting out that I'm like, this is going to be a gem. Like, this is just what a treat to be speaking with Mirin. This is just going to be such a treat for the listeners. And then I DM'd her on Twitter, and I was just like, hey, I was kicking myself. I forgot to ask you about the one-word titles. And she offered to send a voice memo to me, recorded herself, send it to me to answer that question, because that was so important to her and so very on the forefront of her mind, this idea of one-word titles. So basically that's the question I would pose if you were standing in front of me. So what was the importance of one-word titles throughout this book?
So I wanted to name each of the chapters one word because it really helped my process to try to distill what each chapter was going to be about. When I normally do my long form stories, that's the question I always ask myself before I even start writing. I say, what is this story really about, right? It's not just a profile of a superstar who's about to enter the draft, or it's not just a profile about somebody who won MVP. It's a story about fame and grief, or, internet stardom or childhood. Like there's all these themes that are part of it. And so when I was doing the book, essentially a book is like 15 long forms in one. So I had to ask myself that exact question for each chapter. And I found that naming each chapter one word helped me really concretize what each one was going to be about. And it also helped me think very clearly about the multiple meanings that I wanted to convey in each chapter. So for example, hunger is not just about literal hunger. It's about desire and just enormous determination to succeed. The last chapter, home, is not just about a physical home and architecture. It's about belonging and finding a space that, where you feel accepted. So that's sort of the reasoning behind why I wanted to do one word chapter titles.
There's a moment in the book where, Giannis is in the NBA and, he's starting to become a star, and his younger brother, Alex, is there watching him practice. And Giannis, he says, like, this is how hard work, this is how hard you need to work, like this. And he's showing him, like, this is the effort you need to put in. And that's so incredible and important, this idea of rigor and what it looks like and what it takes to succeed at a very high level. So in this game, you're performing at a very high level. So what does rigor and hard work look like to you in the way that Giannis was pointing out to Alex?
Yeah, I mean, you mean like in terms of the writing game and stuff?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like 221 interviews is like really, and it's not like a 10-minute interview. It's like hours with people and using a translator and being tired and doubting yourself. And the rigor is like, I'm dead, but I'm going to call one more person. The rigor is like, God, this draft sucks, but I'm going to give it another hour. The rigor is, all right, Danny, you turned me down 10 times. I'm coming back for the 11th one respectfully. I got a job to do. Like the rigor is like, I'm going to be the most relentless, hardworking reporter I can be. The writing is not always going to be good. I have shortcomings, but I am going to damn sure make sure that I work my hardest. And I think, the rigor is also just never feeling complacent. Like, I think a lot of my friends are like, why are you so intense about this? Like, you're fine. Like, you've made it. Like, everything's good. I'm like, do you know how it works? I could be gone tomorrow. Like it's very like, okay, so I wrote this book, but what happens the day after you get the bestseller? Like, you're just a person in the world. Like, you got to keep working. You got to keep moving. So for me, the rigor is like, yeah, but what's next? Okay, that story. Okay, but what's next? Like, what am I doing? Like, I'm already like, what 2022 is like tomorrow. What do we got on slate? So I think the rigor, that's actually why I really loved working on this project. I respect Giannis's work ethic. I respect his stubbornness. I respect his, just utter lack of complacency. I struggle with perfectionism in the way that I think he does. I love that no matter what he accomplishes, he always works like it's about to all be taken away. And I think I'm the same way.
Well, that's like a little grace note through the final third of the book too, that, what if we all went to sleep and woke up and we were back where we started?
Right. That's my favorite quote in the whole book, because even when he's at Chick-fil-A, he says something like, what if I got to hold the trophy because what if it's gone tomorrow? Or so, I don't know what he said. And he was joking, right? But from working on this project, I'm like, not really a joke, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. It really just echoes what you're saying too, because the book comes out, it definitely gets that nice boost that they win the title, and so you're putting the finishing touches on this book, and they win the championship, and it's just like, oh my God, you're gonna get that juice from it. But still, there's that thing like, yeah, but what about 2022? What next? I have to keep this going.
Right. No, I know. I'm already like, well, what if book number two? Like, I, I'm ready to roll. I spent the last like 2 months trying to come up with book number two, and it's but today I had a talk with one of my mentors. Like, but what about this idea? Is that better than that idea? Like I'm past Giannis world. Like I'm ready. I want to do like 10 books or something crazy. I'm like ready to roll. I'm when you work so hard on a book or a story like I do, you put your whole mind, body, heart, soul into it. When it's over, it's over. Like you're ready for the next.
And to that point of having so many, maybe so many straws to choose from, but I love this scene that you recreate from the Honest Book when Kobe Bryant was giving him advice, and he says, you always got to be a kid. And
Mm-hmm.
and what great advice to approach things with fantasy, creativity, always asking questions and asking why, and that gets to the crux of the animating force of what it means to be an artist and a writer of these kinds of stories. So is that kind of the approach that you're taking as you're looking to take those next steps in your feature writing and, of course, your book writing?
Yeah. Wow. I love that question so much. It's so true. Totally. I am a person that's very curious, and I think constantly about things like that. Like, well, why did he go there? What happened there? And there's so much stuff to find out, and like that's why I love books. We could both start right now and try to read every single book in the universe. We'd never finish in our lifetimes, there's too much good stuff out there. Like I'm just obsessed with finding out more, and curiosity is really, I learned that actually when I was at the Orange County Register. I was writing about like a 50-year-old man that his life goal was to attend every MLB park, and he's like lives in this modest home in Yorba Linda out here. And I was at his house, and it had been like an hour of asking about all his memories from the different ballparks. And he's like, "You probably have somewhere to be. Like like it's okay to leave. You won't hurt my feelings." And I was like, "Dude, what are you talking about? This is so fun. Like I want to hear more." And he was like really surprised that I was so curious about his life. Yeah, and I don't know. After that point, I was just like, "Damn, I am really curious. Like I really do want to know." And I think curiosity it colors everything. It's your willingness to say, "No, I'll say 7 more hours to talk about random ballparks of baseball stadiums." Okay, and I love that.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I wonder too, it seems like you're just, you're really, as much as you've done, you're just getting warmed up, and there's so many, you're just champing at the bit to tell so many great stories in sports, right? Longer stuff, more ambitious stuff. So, like, what is your relationship at this point in your career to ambition, and maybe how does that compare to what it was a few years ago? That's always something that kind of changes around us.
I have so much ambition. It hurts. Like that has always been me, but it's changed in that my ambitions have changed. I mean, I used to want to, I don't know why I was obsessed with this idea of like, I want to be the best ever. And it's like, that is so dumb. Like, what does that mean? Right?
Yeah.
Like the best of what? Who decides that? Is there a sports writing authority that's going to make that clear? Like, I don't know. Like, that's not a worthy goal. So my ambition completely changed. Now my ambition is like, I want to tell the most interesting, fascinating stories of athletes and stuff that they go through on a human level. And I have the confidence now to pitch like the big stories, like I've been after Naomi Osaka for 2 years. Like I have no idea if that'll ever happen, but damn sure I'm going to try. Luka Doncic, maybe even longer than 2 years. I want to profile Masai at the Raptors. I am ready to tackle big stories. And now I just need a little bit of luck and people to give me some time out of their day.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, Mirin, I want to be mindful of your time. This was such a fun conversation to get into the bones of what it is to go about this kind of work. So, if people aren't already familiar with you, where can they find you online and get more familiar with your work?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I mean, I love nerding out on process, and this was just one of the coolest interviews I've had in a really long time. So thank you. People could just find me on Twitter with my nerdy writing clothes there. It's just Mirin Fader. And I spent a lot of time on my website, mirinfader.com, where you can find all of my work.
Well, here's the acknowledgments section of this book. Thanks to Mirin Fader. Oh my God, unbelievable. And thanks to West Virginia Wesleyan College's MFA in Creative Writing. And the word Isom, pleasant to look at. That's you, Isom. How great was Mirin? We didn't get into some of the origin story stuff that I typically dig into because I really wanted to do an autopsy on that Skaggs piece, and so that's what that was about. That was awesome. That was really cool. It was a lot of fun. Hope you got a lot out of that. I know I did. I want to dedicate this episode to Kim H. Cross. You know what? This just hit me right this very second. You know how books have a dedication? I think I'm going to start dedicating each podcast to someone. I mean, why not? Priority is going to go to the Patreon crew. So as long as you sign up for at least tier 1, you'll eventually have a podcast dedicated to you. Oh, that's brilliant. I like that. I'm going to do it. If you want an episode dedicated to you, become a Patreon. Let's do this. Let's do this right. Become a patron at patreon.com/CNFpod. Shop around. Transcripts, coaching, editing. You can ask questions of guests. There's a lot of cool things you can do. And also you have the knowledge that you're supporting the community. So those dollar bills go into the pockets of writers to make the audio magazine possible. Regarding Mirin, you can follow her on Twitter at Mirin Fader. It's MIRINFADER, and she's mirinfader.com. You can see lots of her clips, her body of work. This past week, I was lacking in focus and motivation. Not sure why, but got to stay on brand. I shook out the mothballs on this reported essay about making maple syrup in upstate New York, harvesting sap and making syrup. Marries things I really like science, brotherhood, and pancakes. So it was fun to dust it off. And right off the bat, I started reading. I could just see the veins bulging in this piece's forehead. It was like it was going to burst. It's like the piece was trying to deadlift 500 pounds. It was in danger of herniating a disc. It's been fun to comb through it and kindly take out all those elements of trying too hard. I had a real howler of a line in there too, and it was all the more funny because I just took out all the bullshit around it. And so I'm really just trying to sit back in the pocket and let the play unfold instead of panicking. I think it's got potential. I have no idea where it's going to go, but whatever. Last time I looked at it was in 2017, and the experience of the piece of essentially the hardcore immersion reporting, I think might have been 2013. So you a lot of distance there. Yeah, I shadow and took part in this family and how they harvest sap in their maple grove or sugar bush. Great experience overall. It's awesome stuff. I have no idea what to do with the piece, but it's been good to go over it and just tell it to breathe and man, cool. Catch your breath, man. Be cool. Be cool. It's all going to be okay. You've been on the bench for a few years, and now it's time to put you back in the batting cages so we can work on a few things. You know you come to this podcast for a grab bag of mixed sports metaphors. Well, that's got to be it, right? I think so. We're getting late in 2021, aren't we? Damn, how'd that happen? Well, one thing I do know, CNFers, if you can't do, interview. See ya.